Okay, well, we might get started. It's 3 minutes past 10, so we want to make sure that we're on time today. So good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. Sending a warm welcome to everyone here with us today. This is the first webinar for the Domestic Family and Sexual Violence Data Insights Network for 2025. My name is Amy Dellett. I work for QCOS, the Queensland Council of Social Service, and I'm the Senior Data Analyst in the Research and Policy team at QCOS. I'm the project lead for this initiative, and I coordinate and facilitate the DFSV Data Insights Network. So I'm joining you from Meanjin in Brisbane on the banks of the beautiful Maewa Brisbane River, and I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Yagara and Turrbal people, and all First Nations colleagues and friends online in the webinar today. As way of introduction, we'd encourage you all to share if you feel comfortable in doing so in the chat, who you are, where you work, and acknowledge country where you are today in the chat as well. So the purpose for today is to understand what is the value of data for government. In this session, we'll outline what's possible with using data in government and how data can help inform effective program design and redesign, policy development, allocating resources, and monitoring outcomes. For the network, the first webinar we held back in September last year was the launch of the network, and the focus of the webinar was on the value of data and how it can improve practice. Guest speaker Dr. Ruth Knight outlined the benefits and opportunities of using data-informed approaches in our work and the value to DFSV services and practitioners. Today, the audience for this webinar is staff working within investment and commissioning program and policy roles and contract managers within the Department of Family, Seniors, Disability Services and Child Safety. Therefore, this webinar has a slightly different lens on the content than previous network events. However, it's also helpful for the DFSV service sector to understand what governments are looking for in terms of data and also why they need data. So today's session is for 1.5 hours. I'll spend 10 to 15 minutes for the introduction and welcome. As this is the first webinar for the year, I'll also take some time to revisit the purpose of the network, and I'll talk to some of the resources that are now available for the DFSV services sector through this initiative. We have 60 minutes for the guest speaker presentation by Angkana Whiley, and there will be 10 minutes for discussion and Q&A. Then we'll have a 5-minute wrap up and polling at the end of the session. A couple of details to note: by default you will be on mute, but your camera will be turned on. This session will be recorded. If you don't want your face shown in the recording, please feel free to turn your camera off. The Q&A component of the webinar will not be recorded today. If during Q&A you would like to ask a question, you can write the question in the chat. The other option is you can use the raise your hand emoji and then take yourself off mute to ask the question. If we run out of time with the Q&A today, we can connect with you individually after the session, so please include any questions you have in the chat pane. So QCOS is Queensland's peak body for the social service sector. Our vision is to achieve equality, opportunity and wellbeing for all Queenslanders. QCOS is also the state's interim DFV peak body for the domestic and family violence sector. For inquiries related to the DFV peak body, please contact dfvpeak@qcos.org.au. The DFSV Data Insights Initiative and the Data Insights Network is funded separately to the DFV peak. So the Queensland Government has funded QCOS to deliver activities that aim to build and strengthen the data capability of DFSV services staff and DFSV organisations and internally within the department. And this initiative also extends to sexual violence services as well. So QCOS acknowledges the terrible impact of domestic, family and sexual violence on individuals, families and communities, and the strength and resilience of the children and adults who have and are still experiencing violence. We pay respects to those who did not survive and to their family members and friends. We acknowledge and celebrate the work, strength, and courage of the domestic, family, and sexual violence sector, the outcomes that have already been achieved, and to all those who are part of this journey now. As a network, these discussions focus on domestic, family, and sexual violence. The presentation components of the session will be recorded, so if you need to step away, you're more than welcome to come back and watch the session at a later time. If you do find yourself in need of support, please reach out to your EAP, supervisor, or a support service such as the ones we've listed on the slides and in the chat. A reminder for the guiding values of the network. They are collaboration, transparency, a safe place to ask difficult questions, confidentiality, peer support, and innovation. So firstly, just a quick recap on the DFSV Data Insights Network. The purpose of the network is to improve the data maturity of the DFSV service sector to ensure there is an understanding of and commitment to the benefits of adopting an insights-driven approach, to ensure sector uptake of resources and provide support across the DFSV service sector to enable service responses that are underpinned by integration, robust information and evidence-based practice, and to enable the DFSV service sector to be positioned to enact people, process and system changes as required through business readiness and data strategy support. So a really quick overview of the DFSV Data Insights resources that are available for this initiative so far. So we have a DFSV Data Insights website page where you can find out more about the DFSV Data Insights initiative and express your interest to join the network, as well as links to access data supports and resources. In addition to the network, QCOS is funded to provide additional uplift data capability support for up to 20 DFSV funded services. So please reach out to our team if you'd like to request support for your organisation, and you can do this through the link on the website. We'll also share some of the links to the website along with other resources in the chat for you now. So we also have a DFSV Data Insights community door page, which is a resources hub where you can watch previous webinar recordings and also access the resources from the DFSV Data Insights initiative as they become available. You can also read our guide for managers to speak about the DFSV Data Insights initiative and share it with your teams. And you can access that resource on the community door page as well. We also have approval to share 2 draft documents for the purpose of information sharing and further feedback, education and training purposes. So those documents are a draft DFSV Service Sector Data Governance Framework, as well as a draft DFSV Service Sector Data Quality Strategy. So these documents will be a focus for DFSV Data Insights Network future webinars, and we would welcome the opportunity to receive any feedback from the sector about the draft documents and invite you to connect with our team to discuss these resources further. So what I thought we'd do now is revisit the network draft plan and the journey for the network so far, and then I'll hand it over to our guest speaker, and we should have some time for some Q&A after that. So in terms of the plan for the network going forward, this slide maps out the next webinar topics under consideration and development. So today we're hosting the 4th webinar for the network, which is on the value of data for government. We're also currently in planning mode for the next 3 webinars, and we'll share these details of the upcoming webinars when they are soon finalised. So in terms of the journey so far, QCOS have coordinated and facilitated 3 network webinars, and the details of these webinars you can access in the slides which will be shared in the post-event email from today. And for those of you who may have missed the previous webinars, we'll share links to the recordings in the chat now as well. So hopefully that provides a good grounding on where we are with the network and activities. And I'd like to move on now to the guest speaker component for today's webinar on the value of data for government. So Angkana Whiley is a seasoned data leader with over 2 decades of experience driving data and digital transformation across the Australian, Queensland and ACT Public Service. She has led high-performing teams to deliver impactful data and analytic solutions that support evidence-based decision policy making and better public services. Angkana is passionate about positioning data as a critical asset for the modern public service. She believes that valuing data is key to delivering smarter policies and services, and she champions a data-first mindset across leadership and digital government. Whether building data capabilities, designing data strategies, or driving innovation, Angkana is committed to empowering public sector leaders with the insights they need to navigate complexity with confidence. I will now hand it over to Angkana and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'll share mine. Yuma from a very autumnal cold day here in New Orleans, Canberra. Thank you so much for inviting me, Amy and QCOS, to talk through my lessons learned and key points in regards to how we might use data to inform decisions. As Amy mentioned, I've had over 20 years in the public service, and now I'm serving from the outside, where I work in the intersection of policy, data and digital transformation. And for me, there's a natural opportunity for me to have moved from designing policies such as in housing, homelessness, child protection and community services to then leading data reform in government, and then transitioning then to the intersect between data and digital, which has been really fabulous. And now is the time to think about where data and AI, as well as other technologies, can come in and contribute to us working better and smarter with data. So with that, I wanted to also acknowledge and echo Amy's acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participants today. Importantly, I think for me, as you acknowledged, the domestic family violence sector plays such a critical role in servicing our most vulnerable. And for me, how might we use our data and insights to target our services and policy development? And I think the conversation today, we're going to go through some really basic concepts to start with, because we wanted to bring some of the data concepts to the conversation in the early stages, and we'll go through it pretty fast. So please do take down some questions if you have them, and then we'll take to answering them at the end. So we'll introduce the data concepts, and then we want to work towards understanding where data fits in the policy development cycle. Importantly, how data is embedded in the program design, and then resource allocation processes, as well as, of course, monitoring impact and outcomes. So as we go through, please do take down your questions, and I look forward to discussing them in the end. I do want to start with a key point here around what I present today are basically thoughts, views, experiences that I've had over my 20 years in government, and designing and supporting the design of evidence-based policy and systems that I suppose are targeting critical service needs. My goal is to, of course, foster further discussions and conversations around how we might design policies better, how we might introduce data and insights into the development of best place and best models in service delivery. What I do present is not government policy. However, I am leveraging my experience from various jurisdictions in the same space. And largely, I want to anchor the conversation of why we use data in government, and then therefore from policy to impact around the critical aspect of visions and strategies, and making sure that we are, I suppose, setting the scene and setting the tone based on decades of work, decades of knowledge. And so I just wanted to present that we are sitting on a range of strategies, frameworks, and roadmaps and plans that help guide the allocation of resources into the right services at the right time. And so where we use data, I think, is key. And as you can see, the strategy from the Domestic Family Violence Prevention Strategy from 2016 to 2026, that was embedded with some really critical points here around why we need to invest in the right services. So the prevalence rates, the demographics that really help inform the strategy design is really key. And therefore, I wanted to take us through some core concepts of data and data use before we progress through data in government and policy. Now, the domestic family violence sector would know this data. This comes from the ABS Personal Safety Survey. And I just wanted to point out this particular box, that sexual violence experiences of women and men. So we're looking at 22% of women and 6.1% of men. Now, how is this data collected? How is it presented? And how is it consumed and used in practice is where I want to take us. As you can see, there's so many different ways that we can present this information. And it really matters how we communicate this data to decision makers, and therefore that influences how we design what policies and what services we need in order to address the risk and the challenges that people experience. So you can see 22%, what does that mean? It means 1 in 5 women experience sexual violence. And 6.1%, what is that? That's 1 in 17 men. So I think just thinking about, as we're talking through our data concepts, think about what this means for you in your role, in your teams, and how data is used in order to progress your day-to-day work. The other aspect that we wanted to highlight is data is collected. It's collected all around us, whether it's collected directly in service delivery, whether it's collected through surveys, as what you've just seen with the ABS. But this key quote I wanted to highlight from the AIHW, that while data is collected, there is a large proportion of people who experience family, domestic, and sexual violence that may not disclose violence to anyone. And so I think there is a critical aspect here for all of us to think about when we are working with data. Is it complete? Is it truly representing the story and the lived experiences of people? So quality is essential. And I'm buoyed by the growing transformations and data reforms that's happening, not just in Queensland, but nationally in all jurisdictions. And there is a collective goal across government bodies and agencies to uplift data capability and, importantly, data quality, so that we can feel we can have access to the right data at the right time, and importantly, we can feel that we can trust the data and make decisions with confidence. And so in terms of the summary of why data and quality data is important, both for government and the sector, I've just put up 4 key points. That is, that data can be used to identify, of course, the need and demand, noting the quality needs of the data, but importantly, it is here to help us inform the development of those policies, of those strategies, and direct service delivery models. Data does support the monitoring of of the implementation of these policies, and therefore the evaluation ecosystem is really critical here around measuring progress and measuring impact and benefit. On the other side of all of this is the foundations of good data, of quality data, and therefore, in order for us to trust the use of this data, we are building data governance and data management practices in order to ensure that we are collecting the right data at the outset and building up on trusted data over the life cycle. And then finally, we are looking at a more open, shared, collaborative model of data. That is, data is being shared across agencies, across government, across sectors, and across jurisdictions. And where possible, with care, it is being published on the open source so that other organizations, other people, researchers can access the data and use it to gain greater insights. And therefore, as a collective, we are starting to see a growth in the type of data that's available. I've put up some here, for instance, from the ABS and AHW, but also from within administrative systems and from across the sector, whether it's from child protection to housing and homelessness to health and to legal systems to policing systems. So we're looking at a broader capability of data being collected and uplifted in terms of quality and then shared for greater use and greater insights. There's a wonderful quote here from the Honourable Amanda Cam that there's an opportunity to better understand demand, but also ensure the systems we currently have designed are fit for purpose. And therefore, the use of data, the collection of data, and then the sharing of data is going to be one of the foundational pieces of ensuring that we are designing better services, better policies for and fit for purpose for the system. I might then now move to that capability uplift that I mentioned. In my recent experience, I've seen various jurisdictions designing data reform initiatives, and off the back of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a terrific surge up of data as considered as a strategic asset. And I do again, am really excited about the opportunities that's ahead of us when we are bringing together our multiple data sources, multiple data points, but in order for us to bring up the value of data in decision making. So strategic importance is absolutely up front and center. The core capabilities are absolutely being picked up. For instance, data is considered a core capability in planning. It is considered a core capability in policy development, in program design and delivery, in service delivery, and within the back office functions as well. And then importantly, we are seeing data underpinning operations. And in the past, it might have been considered within the digital systems, but now it's actually considered front and center in the design of how we serve the community. So that fundamental aspect of data underpinning our functions is starting to really see us value data as a strategic asset. Data is no longer just a byproduct of something. It is actually something that we use front and center in order to deliver services, in order to design services. And importantly, and this is where I sort of am most excited, is that we are starting to see investment such as this network in uplifting our people's ability to understand and use data every day. And whether it is in a policy role, in a program role, in a contract management role, or in a service delivery role, that executives, that leaders are starting to value data such that we are getting these types of networks and these sessions where we are learning more about data. And then if I could then add, there is that component with our technology and our infrastructure where we are getting a dual focus where not only are we uplifting data capabilities, we're also uplifting our digital tooling. So together they form a formidable capability set for us to work better and smarter with data. I mentioned that Queensland and other jurisdictions, I just got a couple of slides here where I've highlighted what are some of the strategic as well as tactical capability uplift and initiatives that are in play. The Queensland Department of Customer Services Open Data Small and Family Business has really important work to do in terms of uplifting data and digital capabilities. Here's some that they are working towards, such as a data and AI strategy, which is really exciting, and importantly, that data capability framework and data maturity assessment. So uplifting the foundations of good data. In the digital infrastructure space, we are seeing wonderful capabilities come together. We've got the open data portal and platform, but we've also got the standards-based architecture, the Queensland Government Enterprise Architecture, which is coming together and bringing together a cloud analytics platform. So you can have data accessible to in one place, which is fabulous. And then, of course, the contributions that Queensland is making to the national data reforms. And I'm just going to point to this slide, which talks broadly about the Australian government's own data reform effort. It's been decades in the making. There's a data and digital government strategy that is really leading the charge in bringing together all of the data uplift and data maturity initiatives. And also, importantly, I wanted to point out the Office of the National Data Commissioner has pushed out some really important capability tools to help organisations, large and small, design the best possible data systems. And across the ditch, we've got New Zealand also doing some really great work, and a really great example of this type of integrated data work is in Australia, as well as New South Wales, as well as in New Zealand, growing integrated data infrastructures. I think that's something that we are starting to see more and more of. And so we've got a range of initiatives around bringing data from multiple sources so that you can go to this one place and ask critical questions of it, and with trust, with respect, with security and privacy, receive access to data in order to inform your decisions. And so my hopes then is to take lessons learned from the Australian government, from other jurisdictions, in order to work towards an understanding of how data can be used in policy and practice. This is a lovely little case study. It's measuring the impact of domestic violence on women's employment, and it was conducted by the Australian National University, and it used linked administrative survey data, and that I think is a critical national asset for us to work with to understand comprehensively what is occurring, for instance, in this case, employment trajectories for domestic and family violence and sexual violence survivors. The data sources there will come from longitudinal survey data, from government administrative records that were linked, and therefore you can actually see the trajectory and the pathways of people through their employment journeys. And I think that gives us really terrific opportunity to work through what are the possible pathways and understand, where did they, job losses, reduced hours, employment gaps, and then to be able to design the best possible policy solutions to support them in order for people to not divert them away from, for instance, negative employment outcomes. So with that, I wanted to take us back to basics. Again, some of you in the room may work with data every day, and this may just be an introduction to you. So please bear with me through this process. But I'd love to just talk you through some of the high-level concepts of data, and then we'll go deeper into data in the policy ecosystem. So this is one of my favorite concepts, is that data comes from many places, and it's really how we operate with it, how we work with it, how we funnel it into the right analytical mindsets, the right analytical tools in order to deliver the insights we need. And so there's a myriad of concepts and terms and jargon in the data space, just like any. And so I wanted to talk you through some of them, and importantly, we'll be able to talk through more detail in how we apply these concepts. So I'll talk you through some of the sort of low-level data terms, move into more of that analytics maturity curve concepts, and then eventually talk a little bit more about the techniques. Um, Now, you might have heard of the data life cycle. I think it forms a really nice framework for us to work off. And unfortunately, we have a range of methods and techniques, and so it's really useful to work towards having a really consistent model. And so I like the data life cycle. It presents for me a nice frame of when I have a problem that I want to solve, I want to get some data, right through to collecting it, using it, understanding it, and then delivering the insights I need in order to I suppose, support the decisions that problem needs, importantly, to solve that problem. But the data doesn't stop there. The data that we collect through the implementation of that, we have further use of that data, and therefore how do we share it? How do we actually maintain and protect it, keep it safe and secure? And then if we no longer require that data, how do we safely dispose of it? Or if we do need it for future purposes, how do we safely archive it? So that data lifecycle is one of the critical layers that I find it's a good foundation. On top of that, I really value the importance of us thinking deeply about the ethics of the use of data. And there are a range of principles and frameworks, again, that help support that. And then, of course, in order for us to be able to use the data, there's the data literacy component. I will talk a little bit here about three core ideas: that data is raw in its form. When it's collected, it's probably sitting there, maybe on a piece of paper, maybe in a digital tool. But when we work with that data, it's when we think about that data, it's when we use certain tools with that data where it becomes meaningful to us. And so the observations that we have becomes something of value when we work with it. And so for instance, we do a lot of reporting on our services. And so the reporting tends to be about what, where, how many. So what I call descriptive analytics. But then we also want to know, why did something happen and what might happen next? And this is where we take it from a basic level of analytics right through to a little bit more advanced capabilities. So such as the what next, the so what element, and answering the so what element of what the observations were. And the visualization aspect is really key for me. Communicating the data, communicating the concepts in a way that best meets the audience's needs is really critical. In one of the strategies was this nice little diagram of the Queensland map. And it really does present really clearly the depth and breadth of the impact of domestic and family violence by visually showing people numbers. We could have done a graph, but I think this actually has a much more impactful way. So visualizing the data on top of the analytics that you present is really key. I mentioned descriptive diagnostic data, so I might just spend a little bit of time talking the analytics maturity curve. So we had the data life cycle as a nice foundation. This is the other concept that I would love to see used more readily as we're thinking about data. Now, I mentioned we tend to collect data and we tend to report on the data. What happened? Where did it happen? And then we also start to think, well, why did it happen? And then, hey, if it's already happened, what will happen if something else is added to the equation? And then this is where we start to get into the future and foresighting thinking is, well, what's the next best thing that needs to happen? What's the next best action? And how do I make that decision based on it? So this maturity curve of moving from just wanting to know what happened through to thinking in the future of how might we inform the next best action is what's called the analytics maturity curve. And the concepts that follows these line of questioning is we move from descriptive analytics right through to diagnostic analytics and then the predictive analytics. So they're the things that are most commonly done in the policy, in strategy space. And as we move to the right side, we are starting to see an advanced capability growing across government. And as you know, we've got generative AI now sort of embedded into our work. But artificial intelligence, more broadly, machine learning, has been used in various policy domains and various government domains for some time. And so it's important for us to think about where we want to build our capabilities. So we're really great on the left side. How are we moving more and building our capabilities on the right side? And I've just given you a little bit more ideas here on what are some of those capabilities. I'll just focus in the middle. So as we move into that specialized processing, specialized tooling, that future forecasting, foresighting, the probabilities development, regression analysis, simulation, you've probably heard about that. Economists work with it all the time. As we move to prescriptive analytics, this is where our colleagues across government are thinking deeply about what are the tools, what are the capabilities, and importantly, what are the governance mechanisms that we need in place to make sure we are working with data well. But we've had data scientists working in government for a long time doing some really cool things. And now with generative AI, we are seeing a democratizing of some of that. And so we need to start to think about what those tools mean to us every day. I believe you'll get a copy of this slide, so please do have a look at this the slide pack and have a look at this slide, and then have a think about what these examples mean in your world. So again, I'll pick one, the predictive one. Here's an example. Hey, we want to forecast the spikes in domestic violence during high stress periods, such as, for instance, holidays or economic downturns, or even COVID-19 pandemic had proven some data was collected and reported around these spikes during that time. So now that we have that historical information, we can collect it from police reports, from crisis helplines, and I mentioned the PLIDA, the integrated data assets from the Australian government. We can use all of that to then work with some tools such as Power BI, for instance. You could still use good old Excel, but you could build in some algorithms that looks at enabling your understanding of what might happen. So if all of these things are in place, how might we see a spike, and where? I think the physical location is also, the geospatial data is also a critical layer to this. So there's a whole suite of capabilities that we can uplift and build in order to think about what the data journey is for us. I also wanted to highlight that a typical data analysis project is not linear. It's a messy thing. What data do we have? What's the question? How do we actually answer it? We go and get the data, but we can't get the data, and so we've got to go and find alternative data. And then we just keep going backwards and forwards from steps 1 to 4 before we can actually even do the analysis of the data. But it's not easy to share. So I wanted to just present a really simple form and what are the typical steps of a data analytics framework. Now, I don't have time to go into these today, but I do invite you back. I believe, Amy, we're going to do a session later where we might actually go through a more detailed activity and talking through this type of framework, as well as other ideas on how we can work better with data. But I leave this one quote from Einstein. While we've got all these wonderful steps, to Einstein's quote was, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I really would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. Now, I'm not Einstein. It takes me more than 5 minutes to answer a question, but certainly I think that first few steps, it's really key to spend that time nailing the question and nailing the data elements. So yeah, please do come back for a future session. Now to the core of the conversation today, really wanted to talk about how data can be used to inform the policy development, program design, allocation of resources, and outcomes monitoring and evaluations. Again, very dense content, so please do take your notes down for any questions. These 4 ideas, I've got some frameworks. I've put forward some ideas around some, I suppose, anchoring frameworks for you. But there are, as I mentioned, there are many frameworks out there that people use in order to help understand what the policy problem is, and then designing the right policy, and then right through to implementing the policy in various forms, and then measuring its impact. So the first for us is, how is data used to inform policy development? So I wanted to use the good old policy cycle for this one. I think I first learned about the policy cycle when I was working for Queensland Government. My first job in government was within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander housing. And I was brought on to a policy training activity, and I first learned about the policy cycle there. And to me, it was my first journey into what is evidence-based policy design, and then breaking down to brass tacks, what is evidence-based. It really came down to understanding what are the experiences of people from a needs-based point of view, right through to what are the experiences of whatever policy intervention we have. So that policy cycle to me presents a really useful method. I'm just going to go to this other diagram and walk through briefly the 8 steps. And these have not changed over the years. I've been in government over 20 years. But I think the foundations of how we use these steps have absolutely changed for the better. We now have access to better data, better tools, and the knowledge base is a lot stronger, and we have a wonderful collaborative model that I think buoyed by from when I started 20 plus years ago. So typically, we would identify an issue, a need, a community risk, a community challenge from a policy point of view. We absolutely then work with data to understand, well, hey, what is actually going on? Those observations that I mentioned, what has happened in the past, what are we seeing? And then we work to analyze the policy, and we explore various possibilities. So we explore what is going on deeper and deeply, and we understand and have an iterative cycle back to understanding the problem and asking those questions. Similar to the data steps, we iterate backwards and forwards to really understanding what is going on. And this is where we make sure, and again, looks linear or circular, but actually they're all little figure eights. We keep going backwards and forwards between steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, where we are actually working very closely with the community, with people with lived experience to understand the need. Now, I wanted to skip over to the left side of the circle to working to design the solution and implementing the solution and evaluating the solution. As you can see, it's very similar to the conversation that we will have next around the program design and the impact and outcomes measurement. But really, I think it's all one and the same. It's a different paradigm, a different lenses that we take. This is the policy lens. But importantly for us, what does data mean to this cycle? So for me, it's making sure that when we're defining the problem, we are using data to identify it, to identify need, to identify risk, data from many sources, the ABS, from service delivery, from government administrative systems. Then when we're looking at reviewing this data, we're analysing it for patterns, we're understanding what's going on. We are looking at the qualitative just as much as the quantitative data. So we are looking at case studies, we are looking at research and evaluation insights. We are taking, in terms of getting down to the design space, we are taking all of these insights about what's working and what's not working, and we are absolutely designing policy with these things in mind. But when we are also considering options, we are looking at perhaps opportunities to bring in some cost-benefit analysis, some scenario planning, what-if scenario planning, for instance, and we use data insights to embed the scenario planning, for instance. And then importantly, as we're actually going into implementing the policy, we are designing data collections in policy implementation at the beginning. And so as we are implementing the policy, we can iterate and learn through the reporting system, through the evaluation system, through performance monitoring system, contract management system, that we are heading in the direction that we intended to. So again, the data that's collected during implementation, during service delivery, is critical to a continuous improvement cycle. And then we start again. We bring that data back into the policy process. And so as we work through that policy cycle, I wanted to hone in specifically on the aspect of designing programs with policy at the outset, and importantly, what data and insights can be used to help. Some of you may have heard the good old double diamond framework, which was presented to us through the Design Council over there in the UK. It really gives us a wonderful human-centered, user-centered approach to identifying a problem and solving the problem. And so if you think back at the policy cycle, the problem definition was right at the beginning, and the solution design was the next phase, and then the implementation was the final phase. So thinking about that policy cycle, this is a different way of presenting the same. So again, another framework, to add to your toolkit around how might we understand a problem based on user needs. So the data and insights that we need in order for us to understand the problem. And here we might actually go out as part of that early policy design, for instance, we might go out to the community and use some qualitative research techniques, some ethnographic research, some surveying in order to understand the user needs. We do interviews, we do observation and analysis work. So that discovery phase and that definitional phase has to be frank, backed by good insights and good data. again, I would love to bring in the importance of triangulating insights from multiple sources. So people with lived experience absolutely front and center, service providers and their knowledge and their experience of what works and what doesn't work and what might work, and being creative about the possibility and the art of the possible, as well as the research ecosystem and the evaluation ecosystem. So the research and evaluation base, the data from places like AIHW. So we essentially triangulate data from many sources in order for us to define the problem. And then when we get to solutioning, developing the solution, and then therefore delivering the solution, as I mentioned with the policy cycle, we look to designing the data that we will need to measure impact, we will need to measure progress. So I've put here in the deliver space that we need to absolutely develop some good data metrics, performance metrics. We gather the data on the inputs, all of the resources that need to go into deliver on the services, deliver on the outputs, and then measuring the outcomes. And again, we'll go into talking about outcomes coming up. I have added a review and adapt phase there, which is again about that continuous improvement cycle. So in part of review and adapt is to review our data collections, our evidence base. Are we trusting our evidence? Are we trusting the data? And how do we adjust this? That was a bit dense, but I wanted to move to the resource allocation piece. Again, data is and data insights is foundation to assisting us in making decisions in government. And one of the decisions is how might we allocate resources to the best possible and most impactful initiatives. And so I've just put here some various frameworks that exist in other jurisdictions around resource allocation. So here we've got the Early Intervention Investment Framework from the Victorian Government, and it does truly talk about the importance of linking funding to impact, and has a significant foundation in the use of data and evidence to do that. We also have the Commonwealth Government's PGPA, Public Governance, Performance and Accountability Act, which has within it foundationally the importance of use of data to inform the right allocation and investment in the right policy initiatives. And of course, there's the New South Wales Government's investment framework, which includes a performance and wellbeing framework. It also provides a really terrific business case guidelines and so on. So you've got various models, various mechanisms, but underlying data really does feed the importance of making sure that we are investing the right, allocating resources into the right services and strategies. So importantly for us then, summarising what I've learned from various jurisdictions, we see that in order to inform strategic planning, policy, program design, data becomes a key aspect of that. And I've just put on the right side here some examples of investment approaches that we've used in various jurisdictions. So we've got the social impact investment model. We've had some opportunities to look at social impact bonds. We've had terrific outcomes with place-based funding and integrating of resources at the local level around the specific needs of that community, and bypassing siloed funding models, but actually looking at an integrated approach with the community and the people requiring the services at the centre of the investment. Then we've also had a range of grants and service contracts that again use data and insights to help make sure that it is targeting the right service at the right time. And I've just put some examples there of data use in policy decisions. I've worked for a long time in housing and homelessness, and we certainly have used data in various forms to inform social housing investment, but importantly, making sure that we are targeting it in the right place and right time. And so with that, I wanted to take us through to the Queensland Government's domestic and family violence funding and investment model. Sorry, you can't see the link there, but there's a link there to the document on the internet. But this is a really wonderful holistic diagram, which I thought we would talk through a little bit. And maybe using this opportunity to talk about what data means to this type of investment model. Again, using data across all of the different elements here is going to be a key aspect of the conversation. So again, please do take some notes if you have some questions. Okay, so right at the center of that diagram were these 4 key elements: how and what to invest in, where and when to invest, what is the impact of that investment, and how might we shape the investment. So while it looks quite circular, if you pulled it out, it would look linear. It's really an iterative cycle of continuous thought, continuous analysis, and continuous conversations and decision making. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on what each of these circles means, and therefore how might we use data to help inform answering that particular question or that particular element. So how and what to invest in. To me, we've had a range of different frameworks to understand need and demand for a particular service. And so in terms of data and data use, we can collect data and gather data from multiple sources in order to identify our target groups, and in order for us to then look at what's working and what's not working in that particular target group or that particular community, for instance. Where and when, so we shift to the location and importantly, the timing. For me, along with service supply, which is I've got there on the left, this is about understanding the community, understanding the target group, understanding what else is available to help service that issue, that need, that risk, that challenge. So we use data to understand the local and community context of need. So the first was, what is the need? The second is the local context of need, informing and tailoring the investment into that need based on the local context. What currently exists? What is a gap? What is available, what is not available, what is already funded, what is absolutely a gap in the funding mechanisms. Importantly, what are the local unfunded capabilities that exist? What are the good protective factors in that community that we could actually leverage? I'm going to skip over to shape investment, service supply. Here, of course, we understand what is currently being invested in that particular need. So what's the supply side looking like? What's the balance of investment across the continuum of service, which is the thing in the middle, which talks about early intervention right through to crisis response to recovery, and of course back to making sure that we are preventing the risk from occurring in the first place. So prevention, early intervention, crisis and recovery responses. So along that continuum, where is the service being funded, where the funding exists, where is the gap? And then in terms of impact of investment, we're using data here to measure funding outcomes. So absolutely, this is about the evaluative lens. This is about the progress and performance lens. This is about collecting the data at the right time in order, and then working with it to report in order to understand what is going on, what is about to happen. And if possible, we can reuse that information to redesign the service in order for it to be even more effective. So I wanted to unpack that a little bit in terms of need demand analysis, community capacity analysis, service supply analysis, and output to outcome analysis. Now, these four things ends up being what I would say is your typical resource allocation, needs-based and resource allocation framework. This is something that I've worked with for many years, many decades now, and each element has a critical data analysis component, but collectively they tell a really great story. And so I wanted to just spend a little bit of time talking about each one again. So with the need demand analysis, what's the type of information that you need to help understand? So I mentioned the ABS data. I think that's really important. Program data, government administrative data is really important. That helps us understand what is going on in this particular location, in this particular community, in this particular target group. And for us to deeply understand that, we absolutely then work with understanding from a qualitative point of view just as much as a quantitative point of view. So the data might be from surveys, from service delivery notes, from when people approach the system and literally just say, hey, I need some help. What are those notes telling us? So a qualitative assessment of what people are asking for, what people are coming to services for before they receive the service that they've come to receive. That focusing on prevention and early intervention is again really critical, and therefore having this information and analysing it and looking at it from a predictive lens, and then saying, hey, if all of these things happen, where will our community, where will our target groups end up? That's all really helpful. And so that need demand analysis is that first cab of the rank, I suppose, in that analytical journey. The community capacity analysis, as I mentioned earlier, this is where we start to look at creating local community profiles. So we start to understand what is physically happening in that community, what exists to help serve the target group, the challenge, the risk at hand, and we validate that through conversations, through analytical conversations, but importantly through sessions with service delivery colleagues to identify, is there a gap in that community? I mentioned predictive analytics earlier. This is where we start to form some critical questions around what might happen if these things didn't exist for that target group. So we start to think about more broadly around gaps in services to help address that need. The service supply analysis I mentioned earlier was about understanding what are the current allocations in resources and investment in that community. And we use this to, again, validate the insights from points 1 and 2. Importantly, again, we use this information to find where is the gap, but if we can adapt the investment model in order to serve the right services. So if there's a gap in the service delivery, we know the need, that stayed true relative to the community capacity analysis to then the service supply, and then we invest in what the gap is. I mentioned outcomes really around evaluations, but there is that operational level performance metrics, the KPIs and benchmarking. I think that's something that we need to think deeply about along with the outcomes framework. So outcomes is, people say it's really hard to measure, but if we define it well, if we design it well and design the data collections well, it actually tells a really terrific story about where we've headed and where we had expected to head. Again, conducting rigorous impact analysis is really key to understanding where we've allocated our investment in the right places. This diagram really just iterates, again, the importance of the data points across those 4 elements. But I wanted to highlight the essential here of The key question there is there a service or set of services to meet this potential need? So if all of the need in the community, of all the risks in the community, if we qualify that against the existing capabilities in the community, the existing services, and then we get down to actually there is a clear gap here and we need to invest in that. Now, when you're looking at that, thinking about it across the service continuum is key, because where is it that we might invest? Should we invest at primary prevention point or down the track of, unfortunately, we're in crisis mode and we need to serve that right now? And how do we allocate that and balance it out so that we are investing further in the primary prevention and early intervention so that we can avoid the crisis and the responsive services? My little note there, data ensures the right resources are provided and invested in the right places at the right time, and making every dollar count is critical to reducing domestic and sexual violence. Right, so I might skip that one and get to the outcomes conversation. I'm an evaluator, and I'm really lucky. I'm sitting on the Australian Evaluation Society Policy Committee, where the AES are really wanting to drive quality evaluations that achieve an impact. And this domestic family and sexual violence system monitoring and evaluation framework really does set the tone and the scene and the capabilities needed to help measure impact and outcomes. And so I've just presented a really simple program logic here, but I wanted to highlight, again, from input, activities, outputs, right through to outcomes, there is a suite and a myriad of data collections and data that you can use to help with each element. But it's important within evaluation models, within outcomes and impact measurement models, is to, again, back to that data journey, ask the right questions at the beginning, because once you do that, you are able to then seek out the insights that you need, seek out the data that you need. So key steps for me is designing those outcomes as part of your policy framework, as part of your program design framework, as part of your resource allocation framework. Definitely identify what difference we will be making with the investment, with the resources. Then defining the success and metrics, the success measures and the metrics, the KPIs, the measures that you will then use the data to help answer. Then absolutely making sure, as I mentioned, when you're designing the policy, you design the data that you need in order to measure its impact. So you are collecting and analysing the data, both qualitative and quantitative as you go. And then you are reporting it. And you are reporting it on a continuous basis, because I think for me, there's an opportunity for government to look at an adaptive policy cycle where we are using data and insights to help redirect and redefine our policy interventions quickly and easily, and reduce that time with policy design. With the nice tools that we now have, we can get data and insights a lot sooner than we did in the old days when evaluations would take 3 to 6 months or even a year. So that really is the essence of using the tools to our benefit, is going to be a really wonderful opportunity that we have ahead of us. This just summarizes what I've been saying, but I wanted to just take us to a final takeaways. So we know that data has been really critical. We have used data in government forever. I've used it in almost every single job that I've had, and I've progressed through to actually designing the data foundations so that we can trust the data that we are using every day. We have many frameworks, policy cycle, the double diamond, that commissioning framework, absolutely very essential foundations on how we use data in the right way. Importantly, we need to build our capabilities, our skills in order to do this. But governments are tackling the critical data challenges, as you saw, not just in Queensland, but nationally. And importantly, I'm buoyed by the continuous growth of data capabilities across our teams. I think for me, a key question back to you then is, what does data mean to you? Are you working with data every day? If you're in a policy role, are you using data? Are you using data tools to inform policy design? If you're in a program role, are you developing programs based on data insights? And importantly, are you then seeking data from program implementation? With contract managers as well, in terms of implementing the contracts, there's a suite of data that's needed to help report on risk and delivery. And service providers, of course, you are the coalface of the service system. And so everything that you do with service users is an opportunity to understand what's going on. So there's data being collected there every day. So again, we all have a responsibility to work better with data to improve its quality, to understand what the quality improvement systems and processes are and what are the tools that are available for us. Of course, there's data ethics and privacy. But largely it's, for us to be able to collect the right data and share it and use it and collaborate on it is really key. With that, Amy, I might just pause for questions.
Thank you so much, Angkana, for your time and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. Really appreciate your enthusiasm to share and connect with the network. Also very much looking forward to welcoming you back for the future webinar topic on understanding data maturity and doing a bit of a deep dive into that topic. I think you've given us so many rich insights and examples for reflection and ideas for guiding our work in the use of data, particularly across, program design and redesign and that policy cycle development, as well as allocating resources and monitoring outcomes. Just before we move on to the Q&A, if you're happy to stay online for us for a little bit longer, I've got a couple of more slides, so I'll start sharing my screen again, and then we'll move on to the Q&A component. So bear with me for 2 seconds. So just wanted to mention that we would, QCOS would love to hear from DFSV organisations that have or are working towards mature data systems, whether they're visualising data or working with data relating to First Nations communities or diverse groups, organisations that might be measuring their impacts and outcomes, whether they're examining their data governance processes, for organisations who might be ensuring a focus on data quality or incorporating data into continuous quality improvement initiatives, for organisations that have existing data collection systems or standards or documentation to reflect those systems and standards, and for organisations who may be developing a data strategy or have an existing one in place. So please let us know if you're also interested in being a future guest speaker for the network, or if you think your organisation would make a great case study. We would love to hear from you. Also, just before we move into Q&A, we've put this summary together for DFSV services that may be unsure on how to get involved with the network. So you can join our network mailing list. You can request free one-on-one data support. You can express your interest to join the DFSV Data Insights Forum on Microsoft Teams, as well as developing a case study with us about your data work. We'd also encourage you and express your interest in being a guest speaker for the network, and you're welcome to email us at dfsvdatainsights@qcos.org.au to find out more. So again, please reach out to our team if you'd like to share your data story with the network, or if you have any questions about the network. We've shared our email in the chat now as well. So we'll also just have some very quick polls for this webinar that we will share in the chat for you now. So we'll just give everyone a moment to complete these questions before moving to the Q&A as well.